I think it's very important that we don't see the failure for a whole host of other centres to emerge as a failure. I think for me, the experience of learning about community justice and working with like communities over here has meant that so many of the learnings from the model have been taken on board, even if we don't necessarily have a centre yet. I mean, I'm not saying it won't happen, I'm not for closing it, but I think that it's really important that we see the Community Justice Centre as a model that will work in some communities, but it's really about inspiring others to think differently about the way courts operate and engage with the community. And we've seen that very much so with the work of the Neighbourhood Justice Centre in terms of, as I talked about in the family violence space, and really being a mentor court or a learning lab for other initiatives. And certainly we've seen a host of initiatives, I think, in the last few years where we've seen a rise in service co-location. So we might have lawyers co-locating with doctors and co-locating with nurses and co-locating with counsellors. And we start seeing, a move to think differently about law only having to operate in isolation. And I think that's something that's really taken on board here, I guess from where I'm speaking from, and I certainly across Victoria, I know other examples of that. So I guess for me, it's very much about us really, I think, learning from instances like Brownsville, where maybe things don't always go to plan, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. And it's about thinking about what we can learn and do with our courts so that they can meet the needs of our communities better. And I guess certainly from talking to some communities, I don't always think that, a community justice centre is the right thing. I mean, maybe that's not what the community needs. I mean, certainly in Western Australia, for some of our communities, particularly when we were doing a lot of work here with some of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, there's a real need to recognise that a community justice centre might not always be the right thing for every community. And I really think we shouldn't see that we have failed. I think it's about us looking at the model and looking at what we can learn from it. And there are so many examples of that. We are certainly seeing a rise in centres across the world, but that's not necessarily something that we only have to look for. Oh, look, it's an excellent question. I don't know, Judge Calabresi, would you be willing to reflect on that question? Because we were having a chat earlier about what some of the challenges COVID have presented to you. I don't feel you have to, but if you'd like to reflect on that, I think it would be really helpful.
I'm happy to. First of all, that was the best summary of community court I've heard in 20 years. That was just, it was just brilliant the way you caught everything. And what was interesting is every time I was writing down something, you ended up covering it. So the only thing, one thing I would like to say is that I think criminal justice reformers are going to look at what's worked in community courts and try to, and not only try to mainstream those, but I think the community is going to demand procedural justice, for example. Demand people are treated with respect. And right now, courts can look at the trust and confidence that the community has in them. And for the most part, that's really embarrassingly low. But community courts really get great marks from their local communities. And that's something, again, that reformers are going to have to look at because, confidence in justice is really important. And it's going to be important going forward. Yes, with the pandemic, there are certainly more barriers and budget issues and things like that. But, the Netherlands opened up two, and they're opening up one in Amsterdam in September, which I didn't even know. And Ukraine now has apparently 6 kind of courts that are working, of community centers that are working with communities, and they've been able to do that. The only thing so to get to your question, I'm sorry, but community courts can pivot in a heartbeat because we are community courts. We're in touch with our communities. So yes, we had to close our doors. We went virtually. We're going online. All our services can be done online. Here in New York, probably because it's New York, a lot of people have been in counseling, not just court, people come through courts, but in general, and people in New York do, telephone counseling. They've been doing that for years, even before the pandemic. It can be effective. It is effective. We can get people in the programs. And the one thing I've noticed is that while people are honest in court and they're willing to talk about the barriers, their personal issues with substance abuse or mental health, they're even more upfront in the virtual world because they're talking to me from their car, they're talking to me from their home, and somehow they feel safer or more comfortable really, getting down to some of the heart of the matters. So, in some ways, that's the most important thing, is recognize what the problems are so you can help them try to address those issues. So the thing is we needed to do was to tell our community we care. And so we did wellness checks. And we've done many, many wellness checks. But community courts are in a perfect position to work through this pandemic.
Look, like all magistrates courts, we set up online magistrates court to enable court matters to continue, those that were deemed most critical. We had a very agile workforce anyway. It's part of the NJC culture, I think. So all of our staff already had laptops, so they could start working from home really quickly. So that was fortunate. We did set up a COVID emergency response network on behalf of the local government. When I say on behalf, because they were not able to do that quickly. They were busy managing their own service delivery. So we did that on behalf of the community, but normally would be carried out by local government, which went very well, we think, and served an important purpose for the community. But it was membership of agencies. So it's essentially a place where agency representatives would come and talk about the issues they were facing in terms of responding to their client needs. So that worked well. In terms of what we will retain, what we noticed, of course, as many courts will have noticed, that online magistrates court meant that clients weren't necessarily waiting around all day to hear their matters. So what we're keen to do is understand what we can do now with people coming back into court to retain that benefit, so an improved service. We won't continue with the network that we set up because the emergency response phase has passed for now, touch wood. But we will divulge that into other networks that already exist within the community. Yeah, so look, I mean, my view is, I guess I've got a conflict of interest in saying so. I'm the general manager. I think we responded really well. And the team, Rebecca and her colleagues and Louisa's team, a few of whom are here today, did a lot of work in the policy and education space because they were just able to focus on that really well at home.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I do think one of the big challenges, certainly in Australia, and we've started seeing in response to COVID, is almost a little bit of a pushback, I think, against some of the sort of inevitable centralizations of responses to COVID and the need for there to be, sort of obviously, I don't know, nationwide or statewide lockdowns. And obviously people don't necessarily question the need for those, but there's a real need, I think, for people to want things to be done in culturally safe ways, for them to feel that their community is having a say in the way things are being done and contributing to something. And I think the community justice model provides a unique way to allow that to happen. And I think that can be very powerful and is certainly something we've seen, I think, certainly coming out of some of the responses to some of the Victorian experiences. Yeah. In so many of the centres, we see a real focus on youth and on youth-focused programs, on youth courts, on thinking about what services young people need, and how those can be provided in a way that they will continue to access them. So I think that I think that the youth space is particularly an area where community justice centres can do some amazing work. I don't know, Judge Calabrese, whether that's an area that you particularly want to reflect on in relation to some of the work at Red Hook.
Sure. I think community courts are perfect for working with youth, because a lot of times, not only does the young person have an issue which brought him or her to court, but it's a family issue, and the family needs services. And sometimes you're going to do family counseling. Sometimes you're going to do individual counseling with the youth. Also, the one thing, if the community courts, and many of them are in impoverished areas, the one thing a community court can do is raise the value of education, because that's really what's needed. When we opened, college was not even considered an option by most of our youth at Red Hook, and now it's a real option because of our youth court, because of our GED, turning out graduates every year, going to community college and college, because of college trips we took young people on. And that's, in my view, that's probably one of the more important things the Red Hook Justice Center has done. So there are many ways, all the services and working with the family that community courts can really be effective.